I don't know how many of you went to the Levaya yesterday. I did not go, but just a few words about the loss that we suffered. You know, sometimes people say, a guy was 100 years old. I mean, everyone has to die sometime. And Baruch Hashem, very few, if anybody, lives to 120, and 100 is a very, Baruch Hashem, a long, long life. So what's the big mourning? What's the big sadness? What's the big avelos? And the answer is, mitzad the Gadol himself, there's no avelos. Baruch Hashem, his share in Olam Haba is very, very great. And he was zochet to a tremendous arichas yomim in Olam Hazeh. But the loss is the loss to us, no matter how old he was, that a generation that had a tzaddik and had a Gadol protected the generation, brought bracha to the generation. And when such a person leaves the world, we're bereft. We no longer have the zechus of that tzaddik operating in this world. So we're mourning not for him, we're mourning for ourselves, the loss that we have. And Baruch Hashem, our Gedolim, we've had Gedolim who have died young, but in Eretz Yisrael, the Gedolim b'derech klal have a very long arichas yomim. But every time a Gadol leaves, we're very, very bereft. Now, Rav Edelstein, Rav Shiva Panovich, we have fewer stories than Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, was easy to be maspid because there were so many stories over so many years. But just two nekudas I just want to mention about Rav Gershon, Zechrono Livracha, is number one, part of why there are so few stories about him is his tremendous humility, his tremendous anova. That he was a person who did not seek recognition, he did not seek the limelight. He was modest, he was humble, and he did not want to be in any type of leadership role. And the truth of the matter is, the very definition of who should be a Jewish leader is someone who doesn't want the job. If you want the job is not for you. And the proof is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of all our leaders, the greatest of our Nevi'im, turned down the job repeatedly, and he argued with Hashem over and over and over and over again. Ad kedei kach that the Medrash says he was arguing too much. But that's the sign of leadership. If you want it, you don't deserve it. And you do it only because Klal Yisrael needs you. You have an achrayus. So at some point you got to say, I don't want to do this, but I have to do this. That is what a leader is. And in that way, Baruch Hashem, Rav Gershon was a great, great Manig Yisrael in the Moshe Rabbeinu model of not really wanting that job. The other thing to keep in mind a little bit is that he had tremendous Avos Yisrael, and he recognized that even Jews who were not necessarily so frum had a positive, constructive role in different aspects of Am Yisrael. He once gave a shmuz in Panovich about having Hakara Satov for the soldiers in the army. And whoever was doing the video panned to the audience, and the audience, the Bachrim, and their mouths were open, like they were looking like, did Rav Gershon go crazy? Did he have a stroke? What's going on? But he was making a very, very important point, that we can have many, many machloksim with people. We can have many, many differences of opinion on different issues that are very, very important. But you still have to be makar tov for the people that are doing something for Eretz Yisrael and for Am Yisrael. So in that way, in his quiet way, because he didn't make big speeches, these were short talks here and there, but he tried to be mashrish within his Talmidim, a greater sense of inclusiveness of Am Yisrael, of not looking down, not castigating. He had a brother of Yaakov Edelstein, who was nifter a few years before, and Rav Edelstein too was a Rav for many, many years in a suburb of Tel Aviv. I think it's either called Ramat HaSharon or Hod HaSharon, I don't remember. But Hod HaSharon was a typical Tel Aviv suburb, rich, affluent, almost totally secular. And here you had a real Haredi Rav, who was the Rav of a virtually 100% secular town, and for many years. And the truth is, they all loved him. They loved him. The secular, non-religious Jews all loved him and looked to him for guidance, and Baruch Hashem, he was matzliach to make many Shomer Shabbos over the years. So both brothers, I think, had a sense which is a little bit Yotzei Min HaKlal, of a tremendous Avos Yisrael and inclusiveness. So Rav Gershon was, of course, a Gadol B'Torah and Shas and Poskim, and at the same time also had the great, beautiful Midos of Avas Yisrael. So in that way, he's someone that we could, in our small way, our very small way, we could try to emulate, to follow in his ways. And in that way, all of the good that he brought to the world will continue to exist in microcosm by our following what the tzaddik represented. So, Yehi Zichri Baruch, may his memory be a blessing. Anyone much Levi? Just okay. Okay. How many hours did it take to get back?
Too many.
Too many. Okay, you like them? Yeah. Okay. But again, it's a big zechus to be at Levi of a great gadol, and I hope, as Hashem, that it should be a source of bracha for you. So we're going back to Megillas Ruth, and Perek Gimel is essentially the story of the nighttime meeting of Ruth and Boaz, where Ruth shocks Boaz into recognizing that he has an obligation that Boaz did not previously recognize. Again, from a totally frum standpoint, it seems quite unusual, her behavior of showing up in the middle of the night, uncovering his feet, lying by his feet, etc. And Boaz is even a little embarrassed by saying, leave early in the morning or before dawn, so no one should say a woman spent the night here. We'll talk a little later. Like, why did Naomi? Of course, Ruth is basically a robot here. Ruth is simply doing exactly what Naomi said. In fact, it's fascinating that there's an interesting Kri and Kesiv in Perek Gimel, B'dafka. Kri and Kesiv, right, is the idea that some words are written a certain way, but we read them a different way. Now, in the Torah itself, Kri and Kesiv, that's halacha l'Moshe Misina. That was given to Moshe Rabbeinu directly. Spell it this way and read it this way. In Nevi'im, Kri and Kesiv is a little bit more tricky because Hashem did not give these exact words. But our assumption would be that the Navi who wrote the book, which happens to be Shmuel HaNavi, tried to convey b'derech nevuah kind of a double reading of a Kesiv. So the Kri and the Kesiv is that when Naomi is telling Ruth, you shall wash and you should go to the mikveh and you should go down to the threshing floor, so the way we read it is, v'tavalt, you should immerse, v'yarat, and you should go down. But the Kesiv has a yud after the word, v'yaradati, v'tavalti, which doesn't make sense, al pi pshat. Naomi is saying, I will go to the mikveh. I will be tovil. Now, we don't read it that way. We read it without the yud. We read, v'yarat, you will go down, v'tavalt. So what possible sense does the yud make over there? I will go down. Basically, Naomi is telling Ruth, my spirit will be with you. That don't be afraid. Ruth is a tzaddikas. She doesn't want to do something like this. But for reasons we'll talk about later, I'm not going to talk about it today, Naomi felt it had to be done this particular way. And she's telling Ruth that I will be with you. It's as if I myself am doing this. And of course, keep in mind that in many, many ways, when Ruth eventually does marry Boaz and has a child, it's considered to be Naomi's child because it is the soul of Machlin. In fact, what do the neighbors say? The Shechenot say, Yulad ben LaNaomi. A child has been born to Naomi. That's what it says at the end of the Megillah. What do you mean a child was born to Naomi? The child was born to Ruth. The answer is that since this child has the neshama of Machlin, it's ki'ilu, it is Naomi getting her son back. And that is why she's saying, I will be the one that will be preparing this to get the marriage with Boaz. Yeah?
So we say we don't read it with the yud. Is the Balkorah trained to ignore the yud?
Well, that's one of the things you prepare. if you're a Balkorah reading from a klaf, when you see that word with a yud, you don't read it. That'll be your preparation for a Balkorah. If you didn't prepare, you wouldn't know what's a Kri and a Ksiv. Now, there are, in the Mefarshim, pshatim that there are in traditional Mefarshim, but we don't really accept it all, that talk about mistakes, printing mistakes, or not printing, but writing mistakes, the incorrect gersais. And there is, even though that sounds apikoursis, Lamaisa, Barbanel says it, and the like. But b'derech klal, we don't view it as a mistaken transcription. We view it as having a double meaning, a double entendre. Sometimes we know what it is. Like here, I think you can see what it is. Naomi is saying, I'm with you. Sometimes we frankly don't know what it is, meaning I can't say I can explain every Kriya and a Ksiv, but I do believe there will be a meaning in the Kriya and the Ksiv in terms of the different messages that are being communicated. Okay. Now, at the end, in the morning, though, before Ruth leaves, now remember, they did not have any consummation. There was no intercourse in the Goren, because until there's a kedushin and a marriage, of course, there is no sexual intimacy. But she does sleep with him, sleep next to him or at his feet. I'm not sure if they slept really, it's hard to know. But she spent the night. There. Halachically, it's interesting. You might say, isn't there a problem of yichud? So the truth of the matter is, yichud with a single woman who's not a nida, yichud with a penuya tahora, may only be an Isser D'Rabbanan that came much later, meaning the Isser of yichud, the Oraisa, is with an erva like an Eishasish. This is Yichud Penuya, and she's not a Nida. She went to the mikveh. So this is actually only from the Zman of David HaMelech, which is fascinating. Maybe David HaMelech enacted the Gezerah, remembering the story of his great-grandmother and Boaz. Whatever it was, Boaz's Yichud with Ruth was halachically permitted at the time, because she was a Penuya, and she was Tahora. So she was not an Erva Bichlal. Yeah.
If we say that HaRav, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc., accepted and followed the Mitzvah Rabbanan as well, why wouldn't we expect the later generations to follow?
Well, apparently it wasn't true for the later. In other words, this was a unique avodah of the avos, and it was not necessarily emulated. Certainly, the Drabbanans were not emulated by other generations until the Chachamim made the Gezerah. Now, let me just point out, though, in the morning before Ruth left, Boaz gave her a gift to give to her mother-in-law. He measured sheish sa'orim. He measured 6 sa'orim, barleys. So the Medrash asks, what do you mean 6 barleys? Do you mean 6 measures of barley? A measure is a big thing. That would have been too heavy for her to carry. You're giving her 50 pounds or 100 pounds. Elamai, 6 barley corns? What type of gift is that? You take 6 little pieces of barley and give it to her? What type of matan is that? So it actually says, the Medrash says, he gave her 6 barley corns. What's the pshat? It's not for food. The answer is it's a remes. That from our union, which will take place, Boaz is confident it will take place, although he has to deal with the other guy, there will come Mashiach, who is described by the Navi Yeshayahu with 6 attributes. He's Malay, Chachma Ubina. He is filled with wisdom and understanding, Eitzah, wise counsel, Ugavura, and strength, Das, intimate connection to Hashem, v'yiras Hashem. If you remember, these words might sound vaguely familiar. You have to have a pretty good memory. When we take out the Torah on Yom Tov, and we recite the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim. So after we recite the Yud Gimel Midos of Rachamim, we say a prayer, Ribono Shel Olam. It's in every siddur or machzor. And it mentions that we ask Hashem to inspire us with Chachmu Bina, Eitzah Gvura, Das v'yiras Hashem. These are 6 attributes of the Mashiach that Yeshayahu describes. And Boaz apparently knows this pasuk or knows this teaching, even though it's before Yeshayahu. And Boaz gives this symbol to us to communicate to her that there will be offspring from this union that will embody these 6 attributes. Now, did Boaz have to explain this? That's always a question, right? When somebody does something, and Chazal Darshan, it's a great symbolic gesture. So what does that mean? I mean, is Ruth supposed to figure that out? Is Naomi supposed to, here, take these 6 barley corns? Oh yeah, that's the... Or did Boaz explain it? I don't know. And it's an interesting question exactly how these symbolic things work. Because certainly somebody would give me 6 barley corns without any explanation. I would not automatically chop any particular connection to anything. One other point, though, I would add to the Medrash. I didn't see this, but I'm just speculating. Why barley, though? Why barley? Now, it is the barley harvest, so barley is the grain, right? That's there. On the other hand, the wheat harvest already occurred as well, because if you remember, it says Ruth was gleaning from the barley harvest to the wheat harvest. So there is wheat at this point. So why is Boaz merames Mashiach through barley rather than wheat? Because there is wheat. So one might say, I didn't see this anywhere, one might say that, barley is always described as maichel behema, the food of an animal, as opposed to wheat, that's human consumption. And maybe the remez is that the greatness of David HaMelech and the greatness of Mashiach is their humility. They're making themselves like an animal, meaning no pretensions, no gaiva, no arrogance. Right? A ben adam that's meis ematzma. In fact, Chazal or Meshabech, one of the ways a humble person is described, although it's not understood literally, is he makes himself like an animal. Now that doesn't mean what it sounds in English. That doesn't sound very good. That sounds like disgusting. No, making himself like an animal is an expression Chazal use to talk about humility, lack of gaiva, lack of arrogance. So maybe the remez is it's the zechus of anava that will give greatness to David HaMelech and to eventually Mashiach. That's why barley might again, I didn't see it, but that's why barley might have been used. Okay. Anyway, Ruth goes back to Naomi and gives her the barley corns, and I guess Naomi either hears the explanation or Naomi chaps the explanation. And Naomi is very excited because she says, if Boaz is already merames about a marriage and a union, he'll take care of it today. Today. Okay. So right now, the question I'm leaving to the side is, why did Naomi feel that this proposal had to be done in such a provocative way? Why couldn't she just go to Boaz and say, hey, you're a cousin, let's take care of the Yibam thing? Okay, she had to do it this way. I'm going to leave that question for now. I want to discuss Perek Dalet, and then I'll go back. So, Perek Dalet, Boaz gets up. Yeah.
If we're assuming Yibam, then why couldn't they have been intimate without kedusha?
The problem is that since it is true that had it been real Yibam, that would have been the case. But since this is Yibam of a cousin, so halachically it's just marriage, meaning spiritually it's doing Yibam, but halachically it is marriage, and therefore you would need kedushin, right? So that's what's going on. You can't use spiritual Yibam lakula to be makel and say I don't have to follow marriage. Okay. So Boaz gets up the next morning. He goes to the gate of the city. The gate of the city, we find throughout Tanakh, is the place where people would gather, and in fact, Beis-Dins would gather, typically meaning, if you had a dispute, you had a machlokas, you'd go to the Dayanim, they would sit at the gate of the city. So court proceedings were public, so to speak. So people should see mishpat and stuka. And the city, of course, is Beis Lechem. And you know where that is, where Kever Rachel is, Beis Lechem. It was a Jewish city then. David HaMelech is from Beis Lechem, in fact, Yishai. But Boaz was from Beis Lechem earlier. And it says, Boaz takes 10 people. Now, why does he take 10 people, right? What is the purpose of assembling? Before he starts a conversation with Tov, it says, Vayikach asara anashim miziknei ha'am, and there's no reason that's given why he took 10 people. So the Gemara in Kesubos has 2 reasons why he took 10 people. One is he's planning on marrying Ruth, b'chuppah b'kedushin. That's his plan. That's what he's going to do. And the halacha is that birchas erison, the blessings you make on erison, on the and the Sheva brachos that you make afterwards is you need a minyan, which means Kedushin itself, marriage itself, does not require a minyan, meaning the only requirement of marriage is there be two kosher witnesses. So if I give a ring or anything of value, a piece of gum that's shava pruta, to a woman, and I say the words, Hebrew or English, or equivalent words, Hareyat Mukudeshes li begamzu, Kedas Moshe v'Yisrael, and she accepts it, and there are two witnesses, we're married. But we're not allowed to recite the bracha of Erson, or whoever, or the Sheva brachas without a minyan. You need a minyan, right? That's the halacha. By the way, it's also brought down that from the time of the Rishonim, there was actually a cherem to be makadesh, a woman without a minyan. Meaning it's actually usher to, even if you say, I don't care about the brachas, I just want to do kedushin, it actually is usher to be makadesh, a woman without a minyan. And some Rishonim even take the position, an amazing position, that if you violate this takana, the marriage is not valid based on Afkinu Rabbanim L'Kedushin, which say the Chachamim sometimes are Oiker Kedushin. You don't even need a get. That's a big machlokas. So, unfortunately, these questions often happen in modern Orthodox communities which have co-ed schools. For some reason, kids love to play this little game. And they learn in Maseches Kedushin that if you give a girl a shava pruta, just a penny's worth, and you say Harei Mekudeshes li, she's married, so a kid learns this Mishnah, he goes over to his girlfriend, or even a girl he doesn't know, during recess, these will be in co-ed schools, says, gives her a penny, and says, Harei Mekudeshes, that's Moshe. Two witnesses say, did you see that? Yeah, we saw that. So now there's going to be a shaila. Does this little girl have to cover her hair? Does she need a get? Can she marry a kohen? Right? So rabbis get these questions occasionally. So is it a valid marriage? So obviously the answer is, well, it was a joke. Okay, that's true. If it's clear that it's a joke, okay, but sometimes not always clear, who knows? So, right, so like the Rishonim that say if you don't have a minyan, it's vade not good, that may answer the question sometimes, or sometimes you'll even have a minyan, right? Now, this will only be a problem, you understand, if the boy is bar mitzvah and the girl is bas mitzvah. So until they reach those ages, it's not going to be a problem, because a katan that's makadesh is not a valid kedushin, and a katana can only be married through her father, cannot be married herself. So it wouldn't be a problem. But once you hit 13, 12, you'd figure they ought to be more mature at that age, but they like to play this game. Whatever, for some reason it gets their fancy. They love to do it. Okay. Alrighty. But be it as it may, Boaz has a minyan, so reason number one is to Birchas Ersin and Sheva Brachas. Okay. Reason number two is because Boaz is going to declare a very important psak halacha today. And Boaz wants it to be publicized. And in the days before you had internet or whatever it would be, one of the ways you would publicize something is to declare it in front of a minyan, and then they would spread the word. And the halacha that he's going to publicize is that female Moabite converts are permitted to be married. Because remember, there's a constant idea. The Torah says you're not allowed to marry a Moabite, even if they convert. If they don't convert, they're goyim, because they didn't give you food and water. And consequently, many people were saying, Rus is puzzle, Rus is treif. You can't marry Rus. She's a Moabite convert. But halachically, there is no problem, because the prohibition of marrying a Moabite convert is only a male and not a female. But for various reasons, min hashamayim, that halacha keeps on getting forgotten. And it's going to get forgotten in David HaMelech's lifetime. Later, remember the day we started learning Rus. I had mentioned that Shmuel Hanavi wrote the Megillah of Rus to legitimate Rus's marriage to Boaz, and therefore the yichus of David HaMelech, who came from Rus. Because this is a forgotten halacha. Part of it might be because there weren't that many Moabites who wanted to convert. I mean, it's like asking a question, can I marry a Nazi who converts to Judaism? Well, we don't have a lot of empirical, we have some, by the way, but we don't have that many case studies of some Nazi who converts to Judaism. There weren't that many Moabites who were converting to Judaism. So as a result, people read the Torah, Moabites can't enter Klal Yisrael, and they figured men and women. So Boaz is going to be mefarsem by his action that a Moabite woman is permitted. Therefore, he wants there to be a minyan, to be mefarsem this halacha, and also, maybe to put it another way, he doesn't want people to think he's doing something secret that he's ashamed of and is against halacha. He wants to do it in a very, very public manner. So this is the two pshatim of why Boaz assembled a minyan. One is for Sheva Brachos, and the other is to be mefarsim. Now the emes is, the Sheva Brachos is a bit of a kasha, because you don't need a minyan besides yourself. The chasan counts. In other words, if it was only for Sheva Brachos, he just needed 9 more people. He would count as one of them. Mashahenkin, if he wants to publicize, he needs like a minyan besides himself. So it's a little bit of a hora. If chasanim are min minyan, then why did Boaz have to get 10 people, right? So as of the emes says, though, these reasons are not exclusive. I mean, they had both of these reasons in mind. Someone had a hand up? Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah.
I was just curious, what gives Boaz the credence, the legitimacy, the credentials to give psak halacha in Beit Hillel? What was his?
Yeah. So the emes is, Chazal say, Boaz was actually the shofar. Remember, this is before there's a king. So the Jewish leadership was given to judges, Shoftim, the book of Shoftim. Now, Boaz is not mentioned in the book of Shoftim by the name Boaz. But there is a Shofet in the book of Shoftim whose name is Ifsan. And Ifsan is the one that had 30 sons and 30 daughters, right? And Chazal say Ifsan is Boaz. Boaz was a nickname that he got later, Boaz. In him there is strength to perpetuate the Messianic dynasty. And therefore, as Shofet, he was considered to be the Gadol Hador. The only question you could raise, which is a good question, is how can he paskin when he's a Nogea B'dover? Meaning to say, the problem is, he's paskining and then he marries her based on his psak. Now, it's one thing if he paskin for somebody else. Somebody asked him, am I allowed to marry Ruth? And Boaz would say, yes, that's a psak. But if I'm asked, can I marry Ruth? And I paskin, yes, I can marry Ruth. There is a problem with that psak, because the one that's paskining is benefiting directly from his psak. At that point, he's an ogea b'davar. But nevertheless, Boaz did paskin, yeah.
Maybe the psak comes before because he's doing it for Ploni, to say that Ploni can marry her, so the psak is for him, and then afterwards, after he says no, he says I can marry her.
Yep. That could be a very good teretz, that Boaz was originally paskening for Ploni, but I think as we go through the text, you'll actually see that Boaz concealed the psak till after Ploni said he can't marry her. Boaz saved the psak b'dafka for himself. Well, back to Pischei Tshuva brings a raya, but Al Pi Pshat, what you're saying is actually a good answer. Okay, so Boaz has a minyan assembled, and Ploni Almoni walks by. Boaz Mistama knew Ploni Almoni kind of walks by this time of day. Now again, his name is Tov, an interesting name. And Ploni Almoni, which in modern Hebrew means John Doe, anonymous, but Chazal darshan it in a negative way. Ploni is mufla, beyond him. The halacha is beyond him. Almoni, he's elaim, he's dumb, meaning mute, in the articulation of halacha. Ploni Almoni, meaning he makes mistakes in halacha, which we'll see in a moment. Now, Boaz then tells Ploni Almoni something that is widely misunderstood, and even in Pshat, you take an English translation and read it, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, actually, just reading the psukim. He says, hey, Ploni Almoni, got something to talk to you about. Ploni Almoni says, sure, what do you want to talk about? So he says, Naomi sold a field that had belonged to her husband Elimelech. She had sold a field belonging to Elimelech, and it's your duty as a relative to redeem the field. Now, this is a familiar halacha. This is a halacha in Parshas Bahar. at the end of Vayikra, that if somebody sold a field because of their poverty in Eretz Yisrael, an inherited field, there's a mitzvah on the relative to buy back the field from the buyer by giving him back his money. No profit on it, meaning you give the buyer back the money, and then you repurchase the field and you keep the field in the family. Now, this is a mitzvah on a relative to do it, and there's a chiyuv on the buyer to agree. The buyer cannot say no. The buyer cannot say, I want a profit. The buyer must give, in other words, this is the alternative to waiting for Yovel. Meaning, theoretically, it would go back anyway when the Yovel comes, but if you want to get back the field faster, there is something called geula, which means if you have the money, you could redeem it, and if you don't have the money, your relative redeems it. Interestingly enough, it's not entirely clear if a relative redeems it, what happens? Does the relative keep it? Or does it go back? It's not clear. The mashmos of the psukim is that the relative keeps it, but then you're not really putting the field back where it was. So the pashtus is that Tov is the brother of Elimelech. Right? Ploni Almoni is the brother of Elimelech. And basically you say, hey, your brother's field was sold by Naomi. As a relative, you should buy it back. You have a chiyuv to be goel. So that part fits very well because Tov is the brother of Elimelech. Redeem your brother's field that Naomi sold. Now, a few questions on that. Number one, how does Naomi own the field of her husband? Because remember, a wife does not inherit a husband. When a husband dies and the wife is still alive, the property would either go to the sons, if there are, or daughter, or children, or it would go to his brother. It would go to Tov and anyway. A wife does not inherit a husband. A husband inherits a wife. A wife does not inherit a husband. So, how does Naomi even have Elimelech's field to sell? So the answer is, there is something a woman gets. A woman gets her kesuva. And a kesuva is collected, if you don't have money, it's collected from real estate. So, she may not have all of Elimelech's fields. Elimelech was a wealthy man. In fact, some of Elimelech's fields may already belong to Boaz and to Tov, because Boaz would get it from his father, Salmon, right? That's how it works. So a nephew could get it via the brother, who's not alive, right? That's how Yerusha works. But the chelek of the field that Naomi got as payment for her kesuva, that is her field. But since it still was originally Elimelech's field, there's a mitzvah on the goel to redeem it. Now that itself is not so clear to me. In other words, if we're talking about a field that Naomi got as payment for her kesuva, so it's not an ancestral field that she inherited. It's not so pashut from the Parshas Bahar that there's a mitzvah on a relative to redeem it. But apparently that's what the narrative in Ruth is teaching me. Okay, so that's how Naomi got the field. Okay. Second question, although this may be a simple question. If Naomi has a field, then why does she send Ruth to go to Boaz or go to glean? She has a field. She has her own field, right? What's the problem? What is she? Why can't she get grain out of the field? But there, the answer is actually very simple. The answer is Naomi shows up with Ruth after 10 years in Moab, the beginning of the barley harvest. That means the field is fallow. It's too late. She's not going to get a crop this year. There is no food. The field has not been cultivated for 10 years. So as a result, we have an immediate need for food. So Ruth has to go glean. And at some point, we don't know when exactly, Naomi sold the field for money, for living, or whatever it would be, right? To say, she could have gotten grain from the field, well, no, that would be another year. That would not happen now. So she had to do it. Okay. All right, so I think we got the first part of the sentence. You know, the field was sold, although I'm going to come back to that. And you, Tov, have an obligation to redeem the field, to keep it in the family. So Tov says, yeah, for sure. I'm very, very happy to do that. Okay, great. But then Boaz says, now this is where things get murky. Oh yeah, there's a condition attached. You can redeem the field only if you also take Ruth the Moabite to perpetuate the memory of Machlein on this inheritance. And Ploni Almoni declines, and we'll talk about why he declines. But here, once again, I got a very simple question. Who says? The Torah says a relative has the right to redeem an ancestral field that is sold. So Ploni Almoni is ready to do that. Boaz says, oh, you can't do that unless you practice what we'll call spiritual yibum on Ruth. Why can't Ploni Almoni say, no, you can't impose conditions on me. I have the right to redeem a field. I don't want to marry Ruth. For what, we'll get to the reason in a moment. I don't want to marry Ruth. I want to redeem the field. Who are you to stop me? What basis are you invoking to stop me from doing it? That's a very, very simple question. And the English translations are not going to help you at all on this. What's going on? So because of this, Rashi has a very, very unusual translation of the word machra. But now you'll understand why he had to give this unusual translation. When Boaz says, the field of Elimelech, machra Naomi, Naomi sold, Rashi says it doesn't mean she sold it. It means she is planning to sell it because of her poverty. Which means Naomi is still the owner of the field. Now, theoretically, Naomi could sell it to whomever she wants. But she should give the relative a first option. Okay, so technically it's not redemption, it's first option to buy. But since she is in control of the sale, she has the right to put whatever condition she wants. Meaning, had the field been sold, it would have been out of Naomi's hands. She couldn't say, oh, you can only redeem if you marry Ruth. No, he can say, I want to redeem and not marry Ruth. But if Naomi hasn't sold it yet, Naomi is basically, it's kind of a blackmail. Naomi is basically saying, you want the field, you got to marry Ruth. So, do you see why Rashi has to learn this way? Rashi has to learn that the word machra does not mean she did sell, but she's planning on selling, and she put a condition on the deal that she's not going to sell the field to anyone who does not marry Ruth. Okay, that's the knech of machra. So, when Ploni Almoni hears he's not going to be able to buy the field unless he marries Ruth, he declines the opportunity, and he says the following: Lo uchal ligoil li. I cannot redeem. Pen ashchis es nachalasi, lest I destroy or corrupt my inheritance. Pen ashchis es nachalasi. So the question is, what does he mean, corrupt my inheritance? So Rashi explains, based on the Gemara in Kesuvos, that Ploni Almoni is making a halachic mistake. He knows Ruth is a Moabite woman, albeit a convert. His mistake is he thinks the prohibition, this is why I said before Boaz didn't say the halacha yet. He thinks the prohibition applies even to women. As a result, what he says is, if I marry Ruth, all of my children will be tainted coming from the prohibited marriage of Ruth. Now, the Brisker Rav asks the kasha, which we'll discuss, why does he say, if he considers it to be usher, why does he say he's worried about his children being tainted? He should have just said, I can't do it because it's usher. You keep that as a question. But Rashi says that the reason why he's called an Am Haaretz, Ploni Almoni, is because he makes a mistake and he thinks that even Moabite women are forbidden. Please note that Boaz does not take the time to correct him. Pischei Tshuva brings a raya and something like this. And Boaz says, okay, I'm going to marry her, and then there are certain kinyanim, I'm going to leave it again for next time. The Pischei Tshuva brings the following. If somebody has a certain priority to do a mitzvah, but they think they don't, and you really want to do the mitzvah, you don't have to tell them that they have first dibs, and you can take advantage of their ignorance. And the raya is exactly from here. Ploni Almoni had the right of redemption and the right of Yibam. He thought he wasn't allowed to do this Yibam because she's a Moabite. Now you would have thought Boaz should have told him then and there, you're allowed to do it. That's why he assembled the 10 people. And yet the Pischei Tshuva understands that Boaz is permitted to take advantage of Ploni Almoni's ignorance in order to do his mitzvah. Interesting halacha. Now, I would say in Pshuto Shel Mikra, this is not mukhrach, because it could very well be that Boaz, like you said, Boaz may have paskened the halacha. Ploni Almoni didn't accept it. In other words, instead of saying Boaz is taking advantage of ignorance, it could just be that Ploni Almoni is so stubborn that even after Boaz says the halacha, he says, I'm not going to. In fact, that might be why he's worried about his children. In other words, he says, listen, you're giving me a psak that it's fine, okay, I trust you. But how do I know that, later they're not going to be a super machmer? I mean, that actually fits. He says, I'm worried about what they're going to say about my kids because this is too controversial. That, I think, is actually a nice answer. But that would be matcha the Pischei Tshuva's raya. Pischei Tshuva wants to bring a raya that Boaz could take advantage of Ploni Almoni's ignorance. And then you have a kasha. If Ploni Almoni is genuinely ignorant, then why is he worried about his kids? He should be worried about himself. Okay. But Bekitzer, and we'll discuss the Kinyan and the Chalipin, we'll talk about that next time, Ploni Almoni declines the deal. Boaz takes it over, and from that union there is Oved, and Oved is Isha, Isha has David, etc. But the main point I just want to get across is a point that people often don't understand, that the linkage between redemption of the field and marriage is not a linkage al pi din at all. It is a linkage, it's an artificial linkage of Naomi's demands to kind of get Ruth married off. And the only reason she could make that demand is because this is a field she has not sold. And therefore Rashi has to say, Mochra means she's going to sell the field. Not that she already sold the field, because if she already sold the field, Naomi would have no way of making such a condition on the right of the Redeemer. By the way, and just one other point, the right of a Redeemer to redeem a field, the buyer must have 2 years of use. You cannot redeem the field until the buyer has had 2 years. So that's another interesting thing, meaning to say that had Naomi sold the field, the 2 years haven't, and that might be another reason why Rashi says she didn't sell it yet. Because had she sold it, 2 years have not passed since her return to Eretz Yisrael, she wouldn't have been able to redeem the field right now. So that could be a second reason. So the two reasons why Rashi says Mochra is not that she sold it, but that she was going to sell it, is number one, if she sold it, she could not have conditioned the redemption on a marriage. And number two, if she sold it, the buyer would have 2 years of possession, and there'd be no redemption right now. So for those two reasons, Rashi says Mochra means she is planning on selling it. She has not sold it yet. Okay? Be well, take care.